Dilip Kumar, Part 14. Before I move on to Nayadaur and Vaijayantimala, I must dwell on Devadas, the first of the 7 films with her as my leading lady. When Bimal Roy approached me sometime in 1954 with the idea of playing the title role in the film Devadas, neither had I seen the earlier 1936 K.L. Saigal starrer, nor had I read Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay's famous novel of the same name. In fact, Bimalda did not tell me at once when he visited me that his intention was to discuss the film he was so keen to make. After some pleasant talk, he let out our mutual friend Hiten Chaudhary, who accompanied him, bring up the subject. It was something I had not anticipated, so I asked for a few days to think it over. He nodded and smiled. Then, as he was leaving, he said very quietly, "Read the novel. I will send you a fine translation." Bimalda was a man of few words. He left and I received the translation the next day. I won't go into details, but it troubled me initially to experiment with the rendering of a character who carried a heavy measure of pain and despondency under the skin and could mislead the more vulnerable youth to believe that alcoholism offered the best escape from the pain of losing in love. As I reflected over the subject, which had already been filmed very successfully with K.L. Saigal in the title role, I felt that it could become a memorable film and find itself a place among the iconic films of all times if I played the part with appropriate discretion. Today's cinema and its audience, sadly, don't have the kind of emotional give and take that the cinema of the 1950s had. The basic reason was that cinema was the main source of entertainment those days, and more often than not, its content was taken seriously by most viewers. I am emphasizing this aspect to give credit to the directors who shouldered serious moral responsibility in our times when they chose to make films that had deep social relevance and implications for the audience. I think Bimalda knew from his own sources that I was a stickler for making the writing base of a film strong. So he had made it comfortable for me to participate in the writing work along with his formidable team comprising Nabentu Ghosh and Rajinder Singh Bedi, among others. The lines from Devadas I must mention here are some of the most responsible and sensitive ever written for a Hindi film hero. In fact, The dialogues of Devadas are replete with a haunting sensitivity, spontaneity, and meaning. They came from the pen of Rajinder Singh Bedi, one of those rare writers whose syntax was so perfect that the simple lines he wrote inspired actors to build up deep emotions in their rendering. Being myself not given to superfluous speech, I appreciated the precision and brevity of the lines he wrote for Devadas. They were lines of profound meaning at times, but they were so simply and sensitively worded that generations of viewers have found pleasure in repeating them lovingly. Jayanti and I carried forward the professional understanding and bonhomie we had developed during Devdas to the 6 films we worked in thereafter. She emerged as a capable artist and a quick learner. After Devdas, when we came together for Madhumati, released in 1958, she had made considerable progress in her rendering of scenes and dialogue. She was diligent and took pains to grasp the pace and complexity of the situations, especially when the surrealistic and metaphysical scenes and situations were given to her for study before we went before the cameras to film Madhumati. It was not easy for me, or for that matter, for that is, Pran Krishna Sikand, and Johnny Walker, that is, Badruddin Qazi, my co artists in Madhumati, to know whether or not Bimalda liked the shots he had taken when we were shooting outdoors and indoors for that film. He was one director who never expressed his delight or approval vocally or through facial expression. If he liked the shot, he just moved on to the next shot, implicitly conveying to us that he had got what he had visualized. We, Pran and I, never gave up trying to get an exclamation of satisfaction from him when we gave a brilliant take, but Bimalda just would not succumb. He would simply say, "Let us move the cameras for the next shot." Then he would amble over to cinematographer Dilip Gupta to get the next shot going. The wonderful trait in Bimalda was his serenity and his refusal to get excited about anything, which was very unusual for a Bengali. His exemplary virtue was his willingness to help his artists if they failed to understand his vision. He once told me in his own gentle manner that the pain he had endured in his personal life when he was thrown to the wolves as a youth and he had to fend for himself and his mother had been an experience that taught him not to ever inflict pain on anybody. Bimalda had a silhouette of Madhumati in his mind when we were concluding our work on Devadas, and he had vaguely mentioned it to me. Later, when he gave me his first narration along with Ritvik Ghatak, a talented filmmaker and scriptwriter, I could sense his unflinching confidence in the subject. There were some people who told him it would be a risk to make a film that had metaphysical layers, which may not be easy for the viewer to absorb. There were others like Rishikesh Mukherjee, I think, who encouraged and supported his belief in himself and egged him on to try a genre that offered splendid cinematic possibilities. Bimalda and Dilip Gupta spent hours in conversation, often with paper and pencil, to sketch and visualize the atmosphere that had to be created for some of the scenes. Bimalda gave a patient hearing to anyone who had a suggestion. All the three films, that is, Devadas, Madhumati, and Yahudi, that I did under Bimalda's direction, gave me the pleasure of knowing a man who believed in perfection and hard work as much as I did. He appreciated my style of working and the pains I took to endow life to the characters. Personally, I felt Madhumati was a clever and ingenious script. In the very first draft itself, I could see the possibilities the script offered. After Devdas, I thought this picture would give us the much needed relief, especially since we would be shooting a sizable part of the film outdoors. It was never the role that was of paramount importance when I agreed to do a film. There were other factors. Every role I played had its distinct merits and provocations. In Madhumati, the incentive was the construction of the narrative and the layers of unpredictability in it. It appeared rather tricky for me to be the pivot of a suspenseful narrative that alternated between the past and present and threw up gripping situations for the audience. None of my previous characters had to get connected to a life that was lived in a previous birth. That was tricky for me, and more so since my character was the pivot of the film's evolution and dramatic appeal. I have always enjoyed outdoor work. In Madhumati, the outdoor work was to become the core of the film, and that alone filled me with the excitement of a child who is promised a long vacation at a destination of his choice. To us, Pran, Johnny Walker, Bimalda, Rishida, and me, the time after pack-up was very interesting. We got over the pressure of the day's work by spending the evenings in cheerful conversation and poetic exchanges while the cooks in the unit readied our dinner. Pran and I got along famously talking in Punjabi while Bimalda and Rishida tried to outdo us in Bengali with their conversation. It used to be a little awkward the following day when Prawn had to brim with hostility as the negative character in the script. I must say he was amazingly true to the character of Ugranarayan. I have never considered any particular film crucial to the progress of my career. Each film gave me the valuable experience of discovering my own potential and adding to my understanding of the advancing medium. As I have often said, we who worked during the formative years of Hindi cinema had to tread a difficult terrain. In the case of Madhumati, there was the latent fear that the audience may just not identify with a reincarnation concept. So we worked with a common purpose of taking the picture to the goal of box office success. And we were suitably rewarded as the film turned out to be a success. The songs penned by Shailendra and composed by Salil Chaudhary and their picturization were a great success. Wherever one went those days, one heard the songs on radio and public speakers at community gatherings. It was an exhilarating experience for Bimalda, I felt, though he remained as quiet and as unaffected as ever. As a co-star, Vaijayantimala was very well mannered and spoke respectfully to the senior actors and unit members. She came to the sets with her grandmother, who doted on her and made sure she got star treatment from her producers. Following her grandmother's instructions, no doubt, to assert her star status, she hardly lingered on the sets after the shooting and preferred to remain undisturbed in the makeup room and enjoy the vegetarian cuisine she brought along. Her aloofness suited me and other unit members. We were unable to fathom, though, how she used the liters and liters of milk her grandmother ordered each day, first thing on her arrival at the shooting venue. Did she wallow and bathe in it like Cleopatra? We wondered. My brother Nasir, who liked to play pranks, once brought a milk laden buffalo while we were shooting outdoors for Ganga Jamuna, and he wanted to tie it to a pole outside the special makeshift makeup room we had put up for Vaijayanti. I got to know of it in good time and rebuked and stopped him, averting a perilous situation. By herself, Vaijayanti was not unsporting or unnecessarily orthodox, nor was she given to believing or imagining that she was a bigger star than I was. She knew the facts, but she simply agreed with her grandmother on all matters and, for practical reasons, never questioned her authority. Whenever we shot outdoors, she joined me and the other members of the unit for a game of badminton while her grandmother watched her proudly. She was a fine player and she often gave us, the menfolk, tough competition with her nimble defense and serves. On one occasion, when we were filming Paigam at Gemini Studios in Madras, Vaijayanti and her grandmother found it appropriate to join us at a table that was laid out for tiffin, which usually consisted of South Indian snacks like medu vadas and upma. For Vaijayanti, there was always seasonal fruits and, of course, milk. Her grandmother sat by her side on such occasions and urged her to eat the oranges she would peel for her while she talked about Madras and the great culture of the city. Vaijayanti spoke only when she managed to get a word in. One evening, seeing the flutter around the table arising from the news that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the Prime Minister of India, was going to visit the sets of Paigam a day or two later, before driving off to the airport after an engagement in the neighborhood, her grandmother chose to recall an event in Delhi where Panditji was the chief guest and Vaijayantimala was center stage as the performer of the evening at a cultural gathering. That evening and the next evening, all we heard was about Panditji and Papa. Papa, meaning baby in Tamil, was Vaijayanti's pet name, and all the unit members listened to the Panditji and Papa story with curiosity. The big day arrived, and S.S. Vasan Sahab, the founder of Gemini Studios, got us all together and told us how Panditji would be received and ushered to his office. He wanted me to head the reception line-up, but I told him that Panditji knew Vaijayantimala and admired her, so I suggested that she should take my place. I was supported by all those who had heard the Panditji Papa story, and Vasan Sahib agreed. I took my position at the tail end of the line. Panditji arrived on schedule, and as is customary in Madras, he was welcomed with a rose garland and sprayed with fragrant water from a silver jar with a spout. He acknowledged it all with his wonderful simplicity. Vasan Sahib stood by his side, and I think he was waiting for Panditji to greet Vaijayantimala, who was right there in front of his eyes. Suddenly, Panditji's searching eyes caught a glimpse of me at the far end of the line. He walked briskly towards me, saying, "Yusuf, I heard you were here and I decided to drop in." Vasan Saab hurried behind him, and in a second, Panditji had reached where I was standing, stretching his arm over my shoulder affectionately. I was least prepared for the recognition, and it took an instant for me to realize that I was walking with the country's most loved and admired leader. Panditji spent a quarter of an hour in the studio talking mostly about the potential of the medium to awaken social introspection and the desire to change stagnant customs and conventions in society. He had little time to watch new films, but he came to know a lot from people he met and interacted with in his personal circle. After that, we never heard the Panditji Papa story from Vaijayantimala's grandmother. S.S. Vasan Saab was a genial, unassuming gentleman. We liked each other and became friends in no time. He was the boss of the sprawling studio and was a respected figure in the South Indian film industry. He liked chatting with me and telling me tales that may or may not have had anything to do with his own life. He narrated to me the story of a little boy who spent his days on a railway platform with his mother, who sold magazines and newspapers to passengers who alighted at the station to purchase them. He related to me how the boy carried magazines and newspapers and ran from one end of the platform to the other, screaming out their names to sell them to passengers seated in the compartments. By the time the train belched out of the station, I think he said Chengalpat, a town located in northeastern Tamil Nadu, the boy would have sold most of the material he had with him, and the mother would have sold most of the rest. Between the arrival of the trains, there used to be ample time for the boy to rest his agile feet, and sometimes, or most times, his mother took a nap, resting her head on the bag she carried every day. The boy could never sleep, so he read the newspapers and magazines, often with difficulty because he did not possess a great Tamil vocabulary. He nevertheless absorbed enough to enhance his general knowledge. By the evening, the mother and son would return the couple of unsold magazines to the agent, collect their commission, go to a vegetarian food stall, and have a snack which never quite filled the boy's stomach. I do not know why the story was narrated to me in great detail. I remember listening to him in rapt attention because he was a great storyteller. If you ask me, the most successful filmmakers in India or anywhere else in the world are men and women who know how to tell stories without letting the listener's mind stray even for a split second. Vasan Saab had great knowledge about everything and an imagination that came to the fore when he discussed scenes of Baigam. He took me with him everywhere he went, and it was a great pleasure to be in his company because he had so much knowledge about Madras presidency and the history of the temples we passed by when we drove around in the early hours of the day or in the evenings when the streets would be filled with working people returning home with their purchases for their households like vegetables, groceries, and so on. Some of the streets were lined with flower stalls from where women purchased the flowers that adorned their hair. Vasan Saab enjoyed talking and I enjoyed listening to him. We often spoke about the next day's work and he used to ask me my opinion about a scene he had conceived and he would ask for my inputs unreservedly. I remember I was traveling with him by train to Madurai, about 460 kilometers south of Madras, famous for its Meenakshi temple, where he was to inspect a printing press he wanted to buy. In the train, he told me he was unsure of the development of the scene we were to shoot the next day for Paigam as it was a tricky one where the heroine would muster up all her feminine guile to find out the hero's feelings for her. He said he had been applying his mind to create a humorous situation, but it was just not happening. The train was speeding past fields where women in bright colored saris were toiling to earn their day's wages, unmindful of the heat of the afternoon sun. We were in a nice first class coupe, and Vasan Sahab was looking at me expectantly while he poured out hot aromatic coffee into cups from a flask the train attendant had brought in a minute ago. I told him I had seen a foreign film in which the hero and heroine meet on the terrace of a building where they hope to share some quiet moments. The heroine asks the hero if he had dated any girl before. He tells her he will not reveal all that because it will upset her. She tells him, "Don't be silly. We are grown ups and there is no question of my getting upset." Her hair keeps falling over her face, and the hero leans forward and moves the hair back to see her face clearly. Then he begins to tell her about a girl. He sees the color recede on her face and her eyes betray her anxiety. Finally, he tells her, "See, I told you." She is almost in tears. He then tells her that the girl he was describing and talking about was none other than the girl sitting in front of him. I suggested to Vasan Saab we could do the scene in a bit differently. The hero would do all the talking and the heroine would respond with expressions. He would go on telling her about the woman he is in love with and arouse her envy and curiosity. She would try hard to hide her reactions, but the audience can see that she is getting edgy and jealous from the expressions that flit across her face involuntarily. You think it can be managed? Vasan Saab asked me. I assured him that we could do it. He was very excited when he described the scene to Vaijayanti the next day in the studio, and I could see Vaijayanti's helpless gaze turn to me because the lines were not written and she did not know what I was going to say. How was she to prepare her expressions if she did not know what I was going to speak? I then told Vasan Saab, let us do some rehearsals. He was surprised that I had my lines ready. I told him that I had the lines in my mind in the train itself when we had discussed the scene and finalized it. I think Vasan Saab could not contain his happiness and excitement about the way the scene turned out. That day, and for many days after that, he was bursting with delight, and sure enough, the scene turned out to be one of the highlights in the film. Vasan Saab had immense respect for writers and good writing. He was a writer himself and wrote short stories and novels. He was the chief editor of a Tamil magazine called Anand which had a huge readership. It was thanks to him that I took a liking to Madras, where I desired to move and settle down in later years. It was during the making of Naya Daur that I noticed Vaijayanti's ability to feel a rustic character's mannerisms with conviction. When I was scripting Ganga Jamuna, I felt she would fit the role of Dhanno if she took pains to render the Bhojpuri dialect used in the film with the right accent and inflections. The making of Nayador is a small story by itself. When B.R. Chopra completed the story on paper, he took it to Mehboob Sahab to get an opinion. Those were the post-independence years and screenwriters were brimming with national pride and were in the flush of a movement to give Indian cinema a platform at international film competitions by exploring plots that had universal relevance. Mehboob Saab read the story and found no meat in it for entertainment. He told Chopra Saab it could be made into a fine documentary on the doomsday awaiting the labor force in the country once machines replaced them, but as a feature film, it was not a great idea. Chopra Saab listened to the senior filmmaker's opinion respectfully, but he had made up his mind that he would make the film if I agreed to act in it. He told me this emphatically after he gave me the idea in a nutshell. I liked the idea except for the climax in which originally the bus was to be beaten by a tonga, that is, a horse drawn carriage, by some kind of manipulation. It did not seem logical to me. However, I kept the thought to myself since there was no chance of my accepting the film. Initially, it seemed as if Chopra Sahab and I were not destined to come together. When Chopra Sahab came to me with the Naya Daur script, I was committed to a film Gyan Mukherjee had specially written with me in mind. So I told Chopra Saab that his project would have to wait till Gyan Mukherjee's film went on the floors and he completed the shooting. I liked the basic premise of the Nayador story and the intent, but it was not possible for me to work on two scripts simultaneously because that would lead to overlapping of thoughts and ideas which could affect the content of both the films adversely. I explained to him that it was for this very reason that I had not welcomed the idea of doing Pyasa when offered to me by producer director Gurudat because I was then involved in Devadas and thought of the subject of Pyasa was very inviting for a serious actor like me. I felt there was a similarity in the shades of the character of Devdas and the hero of Pyasa. The logic was quite simple. If I had accepted Pyasa unthinkingly, it would have been released close on the heels of Devadas, and one of them would have overshadowed the other. It made bad business sense to me. Gurudat eventually played the hero in Pyasa, which was released in 1957. Chopra Sahab was visibly troubled, but he agreed to wait. As destiny would have it, Gyan Mukherjee's film did not take off due to some financial hassles, and I was ready to consider Naya Daur. The wonderful memory I have of the outdoor shooting of Naya Daur is the friendship that developed between me and the Chopras. Baldev Raj, the elder Chopra, and Yash and Dharam, the younger brothers, had one common love food. It delighted me immensely to know this. Dharam was constantly busy with the camera assistants and the lightmen, as it is always quite unpredictable how the natural lights on a location would turn out as the day begins and progress towards sundown. Yash was assigned by his elder brother to be with me and take care of my needs. He discovered soon enough that he and I had the same needs: a man's breakfast, a man's lunch, and a man's dinner. So it was agreed between us that we would get our own breakfast ready because we both loved omelets and we knew the cook was a faint hearted local chap who might just faint if he counted the number of eggs we consumed. So, on most days, we got the eggs from the market, and between me and Yash, we chopped the onions finely and slit and chopped the less pungent green chilies we had carefully selected from the market. We beat at least 10 eggs and folded the onions and chilies into the frothy mixture and made our omelets in the makeshift kitchen. The aroma would spread to the tables laid outside, and we would have other egg lovers peeping in and joining the feast. I loved outdoor work because of the emancipation it offered to my spirit. I guess it had something to do with the playful days spent in open spaces in Peshawar and Deolali as a boy. It was Chopra Saab's idea to shoot in Bhopal, and he had identified the exact locations along with Dharam. I remember all of us stayed in a large government building with an open ground near it where Yash as well as my co-artists Ajit, Jeevan and Johnny Walker and I played football. Sometimes we packed up early and sometimes the man bringing the raw stock by train was delayed and this caused a lull in the shooting schedule. It was during the production of Nayador that I began to form the story idea of Ganga Jamuna in my mind. I decided to that if I went ahead and made Ganga Jamuna, I would cast Vaijantimala in the lead. Nayador turned out to be a huge success and Chopra Saab invited Mehboob Saab as the chief guest on the 100th day of its run at the main cinema in Bombay. It was magnanimous of Mehboob Saab to accept the invitation and tell the audience how wrong he was and how right Chopra Saab was in judging the potential of the subject. He complimented Chopra Sahab and the two filmmakers stood triumphantly on the stage while coins flew from all directions. As I mentioned earlier, the audiences we had in our times were very receptive to good cinema. They showed their happiness and appreciation in overt displays like showering coins on the screen and dancing while the popular song sequences were being shown. Thank you very much.